What is up guys, Ghost here, and today I am a very happy man, for the jet gods have descended upon us and showered us with gifts, aka David Serland. So you've probably heard by now, but over the weekend they implemented a very large patch over on the CTE, which has really changed almost everything up for the jets. So in this video, I'm going to be going over all of the changes. There are a smattering of changes to countermeasures, all the different missiles, APS for tanks, which in some way also concerns jet pilots, and many other things. But before I get started on that, I would like to mention that the server-side patch for the dusting fix has been deployed today. The background footage here was a quick round I just went and had on Rogue Transmission, and my god, was it good fun. It's completely fixed guys, the dusting is gone, and all I can say is I'm so happy this wasn't a long drawn out problem that went on for months and months, kind of like we had, you know, after the spring patch. So well done DICE, good job on getting that fixed. One more thing before we get started, last one I promise, but you will be interested in this. It looks almost definite that David Serland has confirmed that the new jet physics have actually been scrapped. So according to him, it took up far too much time, the amount of effort versus reward simply wasn't worth it. So they decided instead to refocus on vehicles in general, which I do think is a smart move. Of course, I am a little bit biased, you guys will know that I haven't been the biggest fan of the new jet physics, and I know there's a lot of other people out there who aren't the biggest fans either. But some of you and a lot of other people who maybe don't watch my channel will be sorely disappointed. But I do agree with this decision. I think it was a bit of a waste of time. It's just too late in Battlefield 4's life cycle, and if Battlefield 5 or whatever new battlefield we get that happens to contain jets has a new set of physics that govern the jets, then that's great, you know, I'll get used to that when it comes along, and hopefully DICE can have the time and effort and testing required to make a new system work properly. Alright, so with that said, let's get started on some of these changes then. First of all, the big one, arguably the biggest one, under radar, is finally returning. Now, some of you who didn't play Battlefield 3 may not be familiar with exactly what this is, but essentially once you drop below a certain altitude and start to hug the earth, you won't be affected by lock-ons from certain weapons. And in Battlefield 3 that meant heat seekers, but in Battlefield 4 it's also going to mean active radar missiles and passive radar missiles. However, Stingers and Iglas will still be able to lock you. Now, DICE did give a little bit of reasoning as to why they're actually implementing these changes here, and according to them, they reckon there's no reason to actually bother flying low and hugging the ground in air-to-air combat. But in a way, I slightly disagree. I suppose in air-to-air combat, yes, but when you're trying to strafe, for example, an MAA tank, and say he pops APS and you want to get the hell out of there, I will often favour flying down low and hugging the ground, trying to put an object like a hillside or a building in between myself and the tank to stop him dealing damage. You guys may have also noticed in my last jet domination video that a hell of a lot of the time I would go down for a strafe, either on the MAA or another vehicle. I would be close to the ground and boom, I would get hit by an active radar missile, and you know, I would just spin out of control, crash into a bridge, crash into a hillside, whatever it may be. So this change will definitely fix those sorts of problems. So if you're flying in a jet, you will have to be below 50 meters for the under radar to kick in, and 25 meters if you're in a helicopter. So this is obviously a fantastic change for the survivability of attack helicopters as well. So the effective missiles that cannot lock below radar are heat seekers, passive radar missiles, active radar missiles on all air vehicles, and then passive and active radar missiles on the MAA tanks, of course. So a couple more changes here which actually affect the cannons of the jets. So we've got reduced deviation of the 20 and 25mm cannons on the stealth jets. That is down from 0.4 to 0.36. So this really isn't going to make a massive difference if you're strafing, for example, a tank, as that's quite a large target already. But if you're strafing infantry with the 25s, it's probably going to make quite a large difference in how many rounds actually hit on target. And the second one here is that the damage of all cannons has been increased by 20% against the scout helicopters. Now, I'm really happy to see this in there. Some of you guys may remember a video I made a little while ago after the spring patch was released on some of the issues that were plaguing the jets and what we could do to fix them. And two of the things I mentioned were, first of all, below radar, which is obviously gotten in there now, so that's great. And the second one is that the cannons needed to have increased damage against scout helicopters, because in a one-on-one situation where you were facing off against the scout helicopters' miniguns, the scout heli's miniguns would just one-shot you, practically. Maybe not quite one-shot, but you guys know what I mean. Every single time. You really could not go into a head-on with a scout helicopter and expect to come out of it alive. So hopefully this 20% extra damage will make the little bit of difference there. Alright, now they've also tweaked the critical behavior of aircraft, like when you get mobility hitted, to make you less likely to crash. So helicopters should spin less and jets should pitch down less, which is pretty cool. You know, that's almost an indirect nerf to active radar missiles, as really their strong suit is simply making the aircraft spin out of control and start going towards the ground. Alright, so next up we have the countermeasures. Each one of the countermeasures has seen some pretty significant changes. So let's start with ECM. That has had its cooldown reduced from 25 seconds down to 20. And flares have had their cooldown reduced from 20 seconds down to 15. Now the idea here is basically that ECM gives you a little bit longer protection than flares. Flares are still quite a short-lived protection. You pretty much pop them and you have to get the hell out of dodge, but of course they will refresh sooner than the ECM will. They've also adjusted the jamming settings to something potentially more reliable, so hopefully ECM should work a little bit more than it always has done. And for flares, they've actually increased the amount of flares fired to increase protective duration slightly. So, you know how you used to be, you would pop a flare, then a lock-on would come straight after. Like, you would get rid of the current lock-on, but you would get insta-locked again. Hopefully that won't really happen. You'll have maybe like a second or two just to get out of the range of lock-on of whoever's trying to lock you. And finally, fire extinguisher, and this is the really interesting one. It has had its cooldown reduced from 25 seconds to 8 seconds, which is a bit crazy. But, you know, as DICE say, it doesn't actually prevent any damage. It is solely for the removal of mobility hits. And of course, if you get disabled, it can save your arse. So, with that massive of a reduction to the cooldown, it might actually be worth giving fire extinguisher another look now. Alright, so next up we have all the different missiles. So just as all the countermeasures have essentially been a little bit redesigned, so have all the different types of missiles. So first up, let's talk about the dreaded active radar. So the role of active radar is now focused on long range combat. It will have bad tracking at low to medium range. Less available ammo means you have to place your shots more carefully and also causes less countermeasure downtime for aircraft on the receiving end. It will have the lowest damage of all AA missiles. If all you do is shoot these from your base, your efficiency should go down with the changes. So that sounds awesome. That was really my biggest gripe with active radar missiles. You know, you could be coming in for a strafe, boop, pop APS, fire an active radar missile in the face of the jet pilot, you get a mobility hit, and that's it. There's absolutely nothing you could do about that. It looks like this should hopefully address that issue. Active radars will just simply not work at that close of a range anymore. So awesome, awesome changes there. Now instead, passive radar missiles are going to take on the role of being focused on anti-jet. So we're probably going to see MAA pilots, or rather drivers, using passive radars more often than active radars. So it will have like good top speed, unlimited locking altitude, and pre-firing. So pre-firing allows for setting up traps, but the hold lock mechanic gives targets good chances of evading. So unlike active radar missiles, passive radar missiles you actually have to keep the lock on, just like you do, for example, with an Igla or a Javelin. So you know that's a pretty big deficit, really. They may be good for taking out jets, but it comes at a pretty big sacrifice of having to constantly keep that lock on. And the heat seekers will be the sort of easy fire and forget style missiles for closer ranges than active radars, with better damage and ammo availability. So these are sort of like the medium range, just like all round missile types. Alright, so next up we have Stingers and Iglas. Now of course these two will be the two types of missiles that aren't affected by under radar. So Stingers have slower acceleration and increased lock time. So that should give aircraft more of a warning. Remember, Stingers are the fire and forget missile. You lock on, you fire it, and then you go about your business. So basically, if they have a slower acceleration and it takes longer to actually lock onto a target, it should give pilots more of an opportunity to pop flares or pop ECM and get out of dodge. Now the Iglas are similar to Stingers, but are more focused against jets with better velocity, but of course they have the hold mechanic, so just like the passive radar missiles, which are good for taking out jets, you have to hold that lock on. Same thing with the Iglas here. And finally here, the last missile change, the HVM2, which is of course the dreaded battle pickup that will one-shot any aircraft, any vehicle in the sky. That will no longer be a one-hit kill, so it's had its damage reduced from 100 all the way down to 52. And finally here, I wanted to talk a little bit about active protection, which is of course a countermeasure, not really jet related, but it's worth knowing because it can affect how you strafe tanks. So what they've done is reduce the uptime and the downtime of APS. So the reload time has been reduced from 35 seconds down to 22.5 seconds, but on the flip side, the duration of APS has been reduced from 5 seconds down to 2.5, so its duration has been halved. And what this should basically do is when you go in for a strafe and the tank pops APS, it won't negate the entirety of your strafe. In the current build of Battlefield 4 on the main game, if you go in for a strafe, a tank pops APS, you're not really going to get any damage on it. That thing lasts for 5 seconds, and your strafe isn't going to last much longer than that. But now bringing this down to 2.5, it means that you're going to have to use APS more tactically. But then again, you will have it readily available much more often. And also, those red lights that normally signify whenever a vehicle has just finished using its APS will no longer appear. So you'll have no way of knowing when the vehicle in question has actually popped its APS. You won't know if it's been used recently, and that really gives them a bit more of a tactical advantage. So guys, I think that's it. I think we're about done now. Bit of a long one here, so give yourself a pat on the back if you managed to sit through the entire video. As always, I'm sure you guys will have plenty of thoughts about these new changes, so be sure to leave those down below and let me know what you think of them. But until the next time guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.